In A History of Thomas and Anne Billop Farmer and Some of Their Descendants, 1907, there's this paragraph about the exact location where Billop billowed the barrels, but that detail is nowhere else ever mentioned, just here. But in the earlier Morris's Memorial History of Staten Island, 1898, quote, "It is said that he covered the deck of his vessels with empty barrels, thus gaining considerable sailing power." The "it" in "it is said," a Weasley phrase if there ever was one, is J.J. Clute, who wrote the Annals of Staten Island 20 years earlier, telling the tale with no barrels at all. And Clute starts his history book saying he spoke to a bunch of old-timers right before they died and got stories out of them to add to the forest of all knowledge that otherwise would have been lost, which is a polite way of saying this is oral history, which is a polite way of saying this is hearsay, which means this is a hear story, which means this isn't history.
So what you just heard there was a short clip by famous YouTuber CGP Grey. He's one of the most prominent YouTubers in the educational spaces, making videos on culture, history, science. Very big name. One of my favorite creators. I watched the vast majority of his videos, but I had a real problem with this. And we have to talk about what CGP Grey gets wrong about oral history. First, there's the claim that because this particular writer cited a, old person and just claimed them as a source without doing any of the work, that makes it oral history, and therefore that makes it hearsay, and therefore that makes kind of oral history hearsay, is problematic, because oral history is a specific discipline of history. It's a methodology. And I can throw up a kind of quick description here, which lets you know that oral history is not just talking with grandma, or not just talking with a person and writing down what they said, and therefore putting in a book and saying, I talked to Joe Smith in 1984. That's oral history. It doesn't work like that. Oral history must be more deliberate. It must be based on like a program of study. It must be clear the questions being asked and the answers given. It should be recorded so that other historians and other people can verify the information, just how newspapers are archived and just how other physical documents are archived. And the whole point here, not to belabor it, is that oral history looks to preserve people's historical understandings in an oral fashion because it offers different things that written history and physical history doesn't. It offers different perspectives, it's a different way of reaching people, and I think crucially, it's a different way of approaching marginalized populations. This sort of people who, for whatever reason, don't have a lot of written physical records. People of low income, people of certain ethnic backgrounds, people who have disabilities, people who have maybe had legal troubles, whatever. The whole point is that this is a way of capturing unique forms of history that the traditional way doesn't really do. And it is about capturing these voices that would be lost to the sands of time if that person was to pass away, their experiences, their memories. Now, of course, oral history isn't perfect. It has its limitations, but as CGP Grey found out in the video, so do written records, and so do archives, so do libraries. They have their gaps, they have their flaws, they have their inconsistencies, and oral history shares those flaws, but it's not hearsay. It is not hearsay by any means. It is a legitimate form of historical analysis that reaches out to marginalized groups, that records unique forms of history, and that is based on a rigorous program of study. So, again, to clarify, big fan of CGP Grey, like his stuff, but as a historian myself, as somebody with a PhD in history, I have to clarify that just talking to somebody and writing it down is not oral history. Oral history is a methodology of record creation and preservation and promotion. And when you look at it like that, you might still suggest that there are limitations with oral history. And historians have this debate. Oral history versus non-oral history versus official archives versus personal diaries versus government documents versus documents from the private sector, and on and on and on and on. But those are legitimate debates that don't reduce oral history to some guy said something 200 years ago and I wrote it down in my book 180 years ago and now it's the truth. So I just wanted to clear that up for you guys. Otherwise, I thought the video was very interesting, but I don't want people coming away from that video thinking that oral history is somehow fake history. Because many scholars today, and oral history is a growing field, utilize that methodology in some super important and interesting ways. And I don't want to discount the work of those scholars and of scholars who will continue to use oral historical methods going forward. Guys, have a good one, and I'll see you next time.